Sometimes a single moment can change everything. When Jace Ramirez walked into tech billionaire Elena Rowe's mansion for what could be his last chance at a decent job, he never imagined his 7-year-old son would end up being the key to everything. Jace, a talented chef down on his luck, had no choice but to bring little Milo to the interview, a decision that should have spelled disaster. The reclusive millionaire Elena, still mourning the loss of her own family years earlier, had built walls around her heart that seemed impenetrable. But children have a way of seeing past our carefully constructed defenses. When Milo wandered away from the tense interview and found Elena alone in her study, the boy did something no adult had dared to do in years. He simply walked up and gave the lonely woman a hug. What happened next would transform 3 lives forever. But can one embrace really heal a broken heart and unite an unlikely family? Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The morning sun cast long shadows across the cramped apartment kitchen, where Jace Ramirez stood ironing his only decent shirt, the steam rising like his anxiety. At 34, he carried the weight of responsibility in the slight stoop of his shoulders and the careful way he moved around the small space, mindful not to wake his sleeping son. The shirt, navy blue, with a barely visible stain near the 3rd button, had seen better days, much like everything else in their 1-bedroom apartment in East Los Angeles. Milo's drawings covered the refrigerator like colorful bandages over rust spots, each one a testament to the boy's relentless optimism. The latest edition, scrawled in purple crayon, showed 3 stick figures holding hands under a rainbow. Above them, in his careful 7-year-old handwriting, he titled it Recipe for Happiness. Jace had smiled when he first saw it, though. Something about those 3 figures made his chest tighten with longing he couldn't quite name. The coffee maker gurgled its final breath, and Jace poured the last drops into his favorite mug, a chipped ceramic piece that read World's Greatest Dad, a Father's Day gift from happier times. The apartment felt smaller in the early morning, quiet, filled with memories of Maria's laughter echoing from these same walls. She'd been gone 3 years now, taken by cancer at 29, leaving behind a cookbook filled with handwritten recipes and 2 hearts learning how to beat without her rhythm. Jace had been head chef at Estrella, a promising farm-to-table restaurant in Silver Lake, when Maria got sick. The medical bills had consumed their savings first, then his attention, then finally his job when he couldn't maintain the demanding schedule while caring for his dying wife. After the funeral, he tried to rebuild, taking whatever kitchen work he could find, short-order cook at diners, catering gigs that paid cash, even a brief stint at a food truck that folded after 2 months. Now, 18 months of sporadic employment had brought them to this moment, an interview for a private chef position that paid more than he'd made in his best year at Estrella. The job posting had been sparse. Experienced chef sought for private. Estate, discretion required. Exceptional compensation for the right candidate. When Elena Rowe's assistant had called to confirm the interview, her tone had been crisp, professional, and slightly intimidating. "Daddy?" Milo's voice drifted from the bedroom, thick with sleep. "Are you making the nervous eggs?" Jace smiled, despite himself. Nervous eggs was Milo's term for the way his father scrambled eggs when he was worried. Too fast, too choppy, resulting in rubbery yellow chunks instead of the creamy texture Maria had taught him to achieve. It had become their private joke, a way for his perceptive son to gauge his father's emotional state. "Just regular eggs today, Mio," Jace called back, though his hands were already trembling slightly as he cracked the shells into the pan. "We've got a big day ahead." Milo appeared in the doorway, his dark hair sticking up in gravity-defying directions, wearing his favorite pajamas, the ones with spaceships that were getting too small, but which he refused to abandon. At 7, he possessed his mother's warmth. brown eyes, an infectious smile, but his father's stubborn streak and curious nature. He was small for his age, which made his personality seem even larger by comparison. "Is today the day we meet the fancy lady?" Milo asked, climbing onto his booster seat at their tiny kitchen table. "It's an interview, remember? I'm hoping to cook for her, but she might decide someone else would be better." Jace served the eggs alongside toast cut into triangles, the way Milo preferred. "And we talked about this. You'll have to wait in the car during the interview. But what if she's lonely? Mrs. Chun says rich people are always lonely because money can't buy friends." Milo spoke with the matter-of-fact wisdom that 7-year-olds possessed, filtering adult conversations through their own understanding of the world. Mrs. Chun was their elderly neighbor, who sometimes watched Milo when Jace worked evening shifts. She had strong opinions about wealth and loneliness, most of which seemed to come from telenovelas she watched religiously each afternoon. "Some people prefer to be alone," Jace said gently, though he wondered about the woman he was about to meet. Elena Rowe, according to his internet research, was 42 and had built her tech company from nothing into a billion-dollar empire. The articles painted her as brilliant but reclusive, especially since the death of her family in a car accident 5 years ago. She rarely gave interviews and hadn't been photographed in public for over 2 years. A mansion where she lived occupied 8 acres in the Hollywood Hills, a modern architectural marvel that looked like it had been carved from glass and stone by someone who understood both beauty and privacy. Jace had driven past the gates once the week before, just to see what he was getting himself into. The entrance alone had been intimidating, 12 feet of wrought iron, flanked by stone pillars and security cameras. "Why can't I come with you?" Milo asked, stabbing his eggs with more force than necessary. "I promise I'll be good." "It's not about being good, buddy. It's about being professional. People like Ms. Rowe expect certain things, and bringing your kid to a job interview isn't one of them." Jace sat across from his son, noting the disappointed slope of his small shoulders. "Mrs. Chun was going to watch you, remember? But she had to visit her daughter today." The babysitting crisis had emerged at the last minute, and Jace had exhausted his limited options. His sister lived in San Diego. His parents had passed years ago, and the few friends he'd maintained through Maria's illness had their own families to manage. He'd considered calling to reschedule, but the assistant's tone had suggested that Elena Rowe's time was not flexible. 20 miles north, in the pristine silence of her hillside estate, Elena Rowe stood in her study surrounded by the detritus of a successful but solitary life. Floor-to-ceiling windows offered a commanding view of Los Angeles, spreading toward the ocean. But she kept the blinds partially closed, filtering the morning light into manageable streams. The room itself was a study in controlled elegance custom. Shelving filled with books that showed signs of actual reading, a desk large enough to land a small aircraft, and chairs positioned for conversations that rarely occurred. Hidden in the desk's bottom drawer, beneath quarterly reports and legal documents, sat a framed photograph she hadn't looked at in months. The picture showed a younger Elena, laughing as her husband David lifted their 5-year-old daughter Sophie onto his shoulders at some long-ago beach day. All three were sunburned and grinning, captured in a moment of pure, uncomplicated happiness that felt like it belonged to someone else's life. Elena had built her company, Nexus Dynamics, on the principle that technology should connect people, not isolate them. The irony wasn't lost on her that she now lived in self-imposed exile, communicating with the world primarily through screens and intermediaries. Her assistant, Margaret, handled most human interactions with the efficiency of a Swiss timepiece. The household staff maintained the mansion's perfection while remaining largely invisible. Ghosts who ensured her solitude remained comfortable. The kitchen a masterpiece of stainless steel and marble that belonged in an architectural magazine hadn't been properly used since she'd fired her last chef 6 months ago. That had been a disaster from the start. A pretentious culinary school, graduate who treated her home like his personal stage, complete with dramatic monologues about flavor profiles and culinary storytelling. She'd endured 2 weeks of overwrought presentations before deciding that microwave dinners, eaten in her study, were preferable to theatrical dining experiences. But lately, the silence had begun to feel less like peace and more like suffocation. She found herself ordering takeout, not because she craved the food, but because she needed to hear another human voice, even if it was just someone reading back her order over the phone. The delivery drivers were instructed to leave everything at the gate, maintaining the barrier between her world and everyone else's. Elena picked up the folder containing Jace Ramirez's application materials. His resume was impressive despite the recent gaps in employment. Culinary school valedictorian, sous chef at respected establishments, glowing recommendations from former colleagues. The personal statement was refreshingly honest about his wife's death and his commitment to providing for his son. There was something about his straightforward writing that felt authentic in a world where everyone seemed to be performing a carefully crafted version of themselves. Margaret had scheduled the interview for 10 o'clock, allowing Elena her usual morning routine: coffee in the study, email review, and the daily pretense that she was still actively running her company rather than letting her capable executive team handle most decisions. She'd built Nexus to run without her, which was fortunate since she'd discovered that success felt hollow when there was no one to share it with. The intercom buzzed with Margaret's voice. "Ms. Rowe, your 9:30 has arrived. Should I show him to the study?" Elena glanced at the clock. 9:28. Punctuality was a good sign. Give me 2 minutes, then yes. She straightened her blazer charcoal gray, expertly tailored, and part of a wardrobe designed to project competence and control. The mirror on the wall reflected a woman who looked every inch the successful executive, though she sometimes wondered if the person looking back was becoming a stranger. Her dark hair was pulled into a perfect chignon, her makeup was flawless, and her expression was pleasantly neutral. She'd perfected this mask over years of board meetings and investor presentations, a facade that revealed nothing while suggesting everything was under control. Back in his car outside the mansion's gates, Jace was having a crisis of confidence. The security guard had checked his ID twice and made him wait while someone confirmed his appointment. Through the ornate ironwork, he could see a circular driveway leading to a house that looked like it belonged in a design magazine rather than real life. Everything about the place suggested a level of wealth and sophistication that made his see. Old Honda Civic seemed even more battered by comparison. "Daddy, your hands are shaking," Milo observed from his booster seat in the back. Jace looked down and saw that his son was right. He flexed his fingers, trying to work out the tension. "Just a little nervous, buddy. This is a big opportunity for us. What if she doesn't like you?" It was the question that had been haunting him all week. What if his best wasn't good enough? What if the gap in his employment history raised too many red flags? What if he was too desperate, too grateful, too obviously in need of this opportunity? "Then we'll figure something else out," he said, trying to sound more confident than he felt. "We always do, right?" Milo nodded solemnly, then brightened. "Maybe she'll like me better. Kids are good at making friends. You won't be meeting her, remember. You'll wait here with your books and games." "But what if—" "No what ifs, Milo. This is important, and I need you to be my big boy today, okay?" The gates began to swing open with mechanical precision, and Jace felt his stomach drop. There was no turning back now. He drove slowly up the winding driveway, taking in the manicured landscaping and the fountain that probably cost more than his yearly rent. The house itself was a study in modern minimalism, all clean lines and expensive materials that spoke of money spent with exquisite taste. A woman in a navy suit emerged from the main entrance as he parked. She moved with the brisk efficiency of someone accustomed to managing other people's lives. and Jace immediately pegged her as the assistant he'd spoken with on the phone. "Mr. Ramirez? I'm Margaret Walsh, Miss Rowe's assistant." "You're right on time." "Thank you for accommodating the interview," Jace said, stepping out of the car and smoothing his shirt. "I really appreciate the opportunity." Margaret's eyes flicked to the back seat where Milo was visible through the window, and Jace saw her expression tighten almost imperceptibly. "Is there something you need to take care of before we begin?" Heat flooded Jace's cheeks. "My babysitter had an emergency. He'll wait in the car. He has books and snacks. I'm sorry for any inconvenience." There was a pause that stretched just long enough to be uncomfortable. Jace braced himself for the polite dismissal, the rescheduling that would never actually happen, the end of his best shot at financial stability. "Ms. Rowe is waiting in her study," Margaret said finally. "Please follow me." As they walked toward the imposing front door, Jace caught Milo's eye through the car window and gave him a thumbs up that felt more hopeful than confident. His son pressed his face against the glass and waved enthusiastically, and for a moment Jace felt a surge of love so strong it nearly knocked him off balance. Everything he did was for that boy, for the chance to give him the stable childhood that was slipping further away with each passing month. The mansion's interior took his breath away: soaring ceilings, artwork that belonged in museums, and a silence so complete it felt almost sacred. Their footsteps echoed on marble floors as Margaret led him through rooms that seemed designed for entertaining dozens of people, though something about the pristine perfection suggested they hadn't seen a party in years. "Ms. Rowe will see you now," Margaret said, opening the door to the study. Elena rose from behind her desk as Jace entered, and his first thought was that she looked smaller than he'd expected. The photographs he'd found online had been taken from a distance or at formal events, showing a commanding figure in tailored suits. In person, she was undeniably beautiful, but seemed somehow fragile, as if she were maintaining her composure through sheer force of will. "Mr. Ramirez, thank you for coming." Her handshake was firm, professional, and over quickly. "Please, have a seat." The interview began formally enough, with questions about his background and experience that felt like a dance they'd both performed before. Elena's manner was cordial but distant, as if she were evaluating him from behind glass. Jace found himself watching her carefully, noting the way her smile never quite reached her eyes and how she kept glancing toward the window as if something outside might offer an escape from this necessary human interaction. He was midway through describing his philosophy about seasonal ingredients when they heard it, the unmistakable sound of a car door slamming, followed by running footsteps on gravel. "I'm sorry," Jace said, half rising from his chair. "I told him to stay in the car, but it was too late." The study door burst open, and Milo appeared like a small hurricane of energy and determination, his eyes bright with curiosity, and his hair still defying gravity despite Jace's earlier attempts to tame it. "Daddy, I saw a peacock," he announced breathlessly, then stopped short as he noticed Elena sitting behind her massive desk. His face broke into the kind of radiant smile that had been charming adults since he learned to walk. "Oh, hi. Are you the fancy lady?" Elena's carefully constructed composure cracked for just a moment as she stared at the small boy standing in her doorway. Milo's presence filled the pristine study with an energy that felt both foreign and oddly familiar, like a half-remembered song from childhood. His question hung in the air. "Are you the fancy lady?" Delivered with such innocent directness that it bypassed every defense she'd spent years building. "Milo, what did I tell you about staying in the car?" Jace was on his feet, his face flushed with embarrassment and panic. The job opportunity he desperately needed was evaporating before his eyes, derailed by 7 years of boundless curiosity and terrible timing. But Daddy, there was a peacock, and it was just walking around like it owned the place. Milo's eyes were wide with wonder, completely oblivious to the social catastrophe he just created. And then I saw this huge house and thought maybe you were lost because it's really big, and he stopped mid-sentence, his attention fully captured by Elena. You look sad. Are you okay? The question hit Elena like a physical blow. When was the last time anyone had asked if she was okay? When was the last time someone had looked at her and seen beyond the expensive clothes and controlled demeanor to notice something as simple as sadness? I'm fine, thank you, she managed, though her voice sounded foreign to her own ears. Jace moved toward his son, his face a mixture of mortification and resignation. I'm so sorry, Miss Rowe. This is completely unprofessional. We'll just go. Wait. The word escaped Elena before she could stop it. Both father and son turned to look at her, and she found herself trapped by two pairs of expectant brown eyes. Something about Milo's unguarded concern had penetrated the careful numbness she'd cultivated since losing her family. The original job posting lay on her desk, a formal document that had brought them all to this moment. It had been crafted by Margaret with corporate precision. Experienced chef sought for private estate. Discretion required. Exceptional compensation for the right candidate. Nowhere in those clinical phrases had there been room for peacocks or curious children, or questions about her emotional state. There really is a peacock, Elena said, surprising herself. His name is Augustus. He belongs to my neighbor, but he prefers our gardens. Milo's face lit up like sunrise. Augustus, that's a fancy name for a fancy bird. Does he like visitors? I wouldn't know, Elena admitted. I don't really visit with him. That's silly, Milo declared with the absolute certainty that only children possessed. Peacocks probably get lonely too. Everything gets lonely sometimes. The observation landed with unexpected weight. Elena found herself studying this small person who seemed to understand something about loneliness that most adults spent lifetimes trying to avoid acknowledging. There was wisdom in his simplicity, a clarity that cut through the complexity she'd wrapped around her life like armor. Milo, please, Jace said softly, his hand settling on his son's shoulder. We need to let Ms. Rowe get back to her day. But Milo wasn't finished. He'd noticed something else about Elena, the way she held herself so carefully, as if she might break if she moved too quickly. His mother had looked like that, sometimes during the bad days, when the medicine made her tired and sad, but she still tried to smile for him. My mom died, he said matter-of-factly, the kind of brutal honesty that children delivered without understanding its impact. Daddy said she got sick and couldn't get better. Is that what happened to your family too? The question should have been invasive, inappropriate, impossible to answer. Instead, Elena found herself looking into eyes that held no judgment, no pity, just genuine curiosity, and perhaps a recognition of shared loss. For 5 years, she'd perfected the art of deflecting such inquiries from adults who thought they were being kind, or journalists who thought they were being clever. But Milo's question felt different, not like an intrusion, but like an invitation to be human. Yes, she said simply. Something like that. Milo nodded with the solemnity of someone who understood that some hurts were too big for explanations. Then, without warning or permission, he did something that no one had done in 5 years of careful professional interactions and maintained distances. He walked over to Elena's chair and wrapped his small arms around her waist in a hug that was pure instinct and kindness. Elena froze. Physical contact had become foreign to her handshakes at board meetings, polite air kisses at charity functions she no longer attended. The careful choreography of professional interaction that never involved actual touch. Milo's embrace was different. It was spontaneous and warm and completely without agenda. He was hugging her not because he wanted something from her, but because he'd recognized that she needed it. For a moment that felt like an eternity, Elena sat perfectly still, afraid that any movement might shatter the unexpected gift she'd been given. Then, almost without conscious thought, her arms came up to return the embrace. The tears that had been locked away for 5 years began to fall, not the careful, controlled grief she'd allowed herself in private moments, but something rawer and more honest. "It's okay to be sad," Milo whispered against her shoulder. "Daddy cries sometimes too, but he tries to do it when he thinks I'm sleeping. Crying helps the hurt come out, so there's room for happy stuff again." Over Milo's head, Elena met Jace's eyes. The man looked stricken, clearly expecting her to push his son away, to call security, to end this breach of appropriate boundaries with swift and decisive action. Instead, she found herself holding on a little tighter to this small person who'd somehow seen through everything she'd thought was protecting her. "I'm sorry," Jace whispered. "He doesn't understand boundaries yet." Social cues aren't really his strong suit. "Maybe that's not such a bad thing," Elena replied, her voice thick with tears she hadn't planned to shed. When Milo finally stepped back, his face was serious but not sad. "Do you feel a little better now?" Elena wiped her eyes, aware that her carefully applied makeup was probably ruined, but finding that she didn't care. "Yes, I think I do." "Good. Daddy gives the best hugs, but mine are pretty good too." He beamed at her with such genuine pleasure that Elena felt something crack open in her chest, not breaking, but opening, like a door that had been sealed too long, finally letting in light. She looked at Jace, who was watching the interaction with a mixture of amazement and terror. This man had come here seeking employment, and instead his son had just witnessed her complete emotional breakdown. By all reasonable standards, this interview was a disaster of epic proportions. "Mr. Ramirez," she said, trying to regain some semblance of professional composure. "I understand if you need us to leave," he began. "The job is yours," she interrupted. Jace blinked. "I'm sorry?" "The position. You're hired." Elena stood, feeling unsteady but strangely liberated. "Can you start Monday?" Yes, but are you sure?" "After what just happened." Elena looked at Milo, who was now examining a paperweight on her desk with the absorbed interest that children brought to discovering new treasures. "Especially after what just happened. Ms. Rowe, I don't understand." "Your son just gave me something I didn't know I needed," Elena said quietly. In 30 seconds, he saw through 5 years of very expensive therapy and corporate meditation retreats. "I think perhaps I've been approaching this all wrong." She moved to her desk and pulled out a folder containing employment contracts that Margaret had prepared for various scenarios. The compensation package was more generous than anything Jace had imagined, not just a salary that would solve their financial problems, but health insurance, retirement contributions, and housing allowances that suggested Elena Rowe understood the value of keeping good people comfortable. "There's an apartment above the garage," she continued. "It's fully furnished and has its own entrance. You and Milo would be welcome to live there if it suits your needs." Jace stared at the contract as if it might disappear if he looked away. "You're offering us a place to live too?" "It would be convenient for the position," Elena said, though. Even she could hear how formal and inadequate that sounded. The truth was more complicated. Something about having them nearby felt right in a way she couldn't yet articulate. "Daddy, what's happening?" Milo asked, sensing the shift in energy without understanding its significance. "I think," Jace said slowly, his voice thick with emotion, "I think our lives just changed, buddy." Elena watched as father and son exchanged. A look of wonder and relief, and she felt an unfamiliar lightness in her chest. For the first time in 5 years, her home wouldn't be completely empty. For the first time in longer than she could remember, she was looking forward to tomorrow. The apartment above the garage exceeded every expectation Jace had allowed himself to entertain. Sunlight streamed through floor-to-ceiling windows that offered a view of the gardens where Augustus the peacock strutted with regal indifference. The space was furnished with the kind of understated elegance that whispered of money. spent by someone with impeccable taste cream-colored leather furniture, hardwood floors that gleamed like honey, and a kitchen that was compact but perfectly appointed with professional-grade appliances. Milo had claimed the smaller bedroom within minutes of their arrival, enchanted by the window seat that looked directly onto a Japanese maple, whose leaves caught the afternoon light like stained glass. He'd arranged his few possessions with the careful precision of someone who'd learned not to take permanent housing for granted. His stuffed elephant on the pillow, his collection of library books on the knitstand, and his mother's cookbook. One artifact Jace had insisted they keep when they downsized from their old life. That cookbook represented more than recipes. Maria had filled its margins with notes and modifications, creating a record of their shared meals and her evolving palate. Less salt next time, she'd written beside her lasagna recipe. Jace loves extra garlic appeared next to her notes for chicken piccata. The book was worn soft from use, its spine cracked, and its pages stained with the evidence of countless experiments in their tiny apartment kitchen. Now, as Jace unpacked it carefully onto the counter of his new kitchen, he felt the familiar ache of missing her mixed with something unexpected hope. For the first time since her death, he was in a kitchen worthy of the recipes she'd lovingly documented. "Daddy, can we explore?" Milo bounded into the kitchen, his energy barely contained by the civilized space. "After we get settled," Jace promised. "And we need to establish some ground rules about Ms. Rowe's privacy." "Elena," Milo corrected. "She said I could call her Elena." That casual permission felt significant in ways Jace was still processing. Elena Rowe, billionaire tech mogul, had not only hired him after the most unconventional interview in history, but had specifically requested that he and Milo make themselves at home. It was generosity on a scale that made him uncomfortable, partly because he wasn't sure what it was costing her, and partly because he wasn't sure what it might cost him. A main house kitchen where he'd be working was a temple to culinary possibility. Commercial-grade ranges, a walk-in pantry that resembled a gourmet grocery store, and prep spaces designed by someone who understood the dance of professional cooking. Elena had given him a brief tour that morning, her manner returning to the controlled politeness he'd observed during their interview, as if Milo's breakthrough hug had been filed away under temporary emotional lapse. She'd explained her preferences simple: healthy meals, nothing too elaborate, with the efficiency of someone discussing quarterly projections. But Jace had noticed things she hadn't said, the way her eyes lingered on the empty breakfast nook that could seat 6, the fine layer of dust on the dining room table that suggested it hadn't been used in months, the refrigerator that contained only the basics necessary for survival, rather than the ingredients of a life fully lived. "What do you think she likes to eat?" Milo asked, settling onto a bar stool that was perfectly sized for him. "I don't know yet," Jace admitted. "That's part of my job, figuring out what makes people happy." It was a philosophy Maria had taught him during their courtship, when he was still learning that cooking was about more than technique and presentation. "Food is love made visible," she'd said, watching him fumble through his first attempt at her grandmother's mole recipe. "It's how we take care of each other when words aren't enough." The observation had transformed his approach to cooking from performance to service, from showing off to showing up. At Estrella, he'd built his reputation on dishes that told stories: butternut squash soup that evoked autumn afternoons, a short rib preparation that spoke of Sunday dinners and family gatherings. But those had been dishes for strangers, beautiful presentations that impressed food critics and justified high prices. Cooking for Elena would be different. It would require understanding not just her taste preferences, but her emotional landscape, the places where food might offer comfort or connection, or simply the pleasure of being cared for. "Maybe she likes pancakes," Milo suggested with the confidence of someone whose own preferences ran toward anything involving syrup. "Maybe she does," Jace agreed, though he suspected Elena's relationship with food was more complicated than childhood favorites. There had been something in her manner during the kitchen tour, A careful distance that suggested meals had become fuel rather than pleasure. A soft knock interrupted his thoughts. Elena stood in the apartment's doorway, looking simultaneously elegant and uncertain in dark jeans and a cashmere sweater that probably cost more than Jace's monthly rent in their old apartment. "I hope I'm not interrupting," she said. "I wanted to make sure you had everything you needed." "It's perfect," Jace replied honestly. "More than perfect, actually. Thank you." Elena's eyes traveled over their modest possessions now scattered through the beautiful space, and Jace wondered what she was thinking. Did their few belongings make the apartment look empty, or did their presence make it feel more like a home? "What's that?" Elena asked, noticing Maria's cookbook on the counter. "My wife's recipes," Jace said. "She was an amazing cook. Self-taught, but she had instincts I'm still trying to learn from." Elena approached the cookbook with the careful reverence people reserved for sacred objects. "May I?" Jace nodded, and she opened it gently, scanning the handwritten notes and modifications that filled the margins. Her fingers traced Maria's careful script as she read a notation about adjusting spice levels for Milo's sensitive palate. "She wrote like she really knew you," Elena observed. She did. 13 years together, and she never stopped surprising me with how well she understood what people needed. Jace felt the familiar tightness in his throat that came with talking about Maria. She used to say that cooking was just another way of paying attention. "That's beautiful," Elena said softly, "and wise." Milo had been watching this exchange with the focused attention he brought to adult conversations that seemed important. "Mama made the best birthday cakes," he announced. "She would let me help measure everything, even when I spilled flour everywhere." Elena smiled, the first genuine smile Jace had seen from her. "That sounds wonderful. Do you like birthday cake?" Milo asked with the directness that seemed to be his superpower. It's been a while since I've had any," Elena admitted. "When's your birthday?" "October 15th. Milo filed this information away with the serious expression of someone making mental notes for future reference. "That's in 3 months. Daddy makes really good cakes, too." "I'm sure he does," Elena said, though she seemed flustered by the implication that she might still be in their lives come October. The moment stretched awkwardly until Jace stepped in. "What would you like for dinner tonight? I know it's my first day, but I'm eager to start earning my keep." Elena's composure returned, professional boundaries reasserting themselves. "Oh, you don't need to worry about tonight. I usually just order takeout," Jace finished gently. "Margaret mentioned it when she showed me the kitchen. But if you're willing, I'd like to cook for you. Nothing elaborate, just something to help us all get acquainted." The offer hung between them, more significant than it appeared on the surface. Jace was proposing more than a meal. He was suggesting the first tentative step toward something that might resemble normal domestic life in a house that had been carefully organized around its owner's solitude. "I don't want to impose," Elena said. "You're not imposing," Jace assured her. "You're giving me the chance to do what I love for someone who might actually appreciate it. That's a gift, not an obligation." Elena considered this, and Jace could almost see her internal debate, the part of her that craved connection warring with the part that had learned to protect itself through distance. "All right," she said finally, "but nothing too complicated, and only if you let me help." "Deal," Jace agreed, though he suspected Elena's idea of helping in a kitchen might need some gentle guidance. As she left to let them finish settling in, Milo turned to his father with the satisfied expression of someone who just witnessed important progress. "She's not really fancy," he declared. "She's just sad and lonely, like Mrs. Chun said. But I think she wants to be friends." Jace hoped his son was right, because as he looked around their beautiful new home and thought about the woman who'd given them this chance, he realized that somewhere in the space between desperation and gratitude, he'd begun to hope for something more than just employment. He'd begun to hope for the possibility of healing for all of them. The first dinner was a revelation disguised as simplicity. Jace had chosen to prepare Maria's lemon herb chicken, a dish that managed to be both elegant and comforting, sophisticated enough for Elena's refined palate, but familiar enough to feel like home. As the aroma of garlic, rosemary, and fresh lemon filled the kitchen, Elena found herself drawn from her study by something she hadn't experienced in years. The smell of someone cooking with love rather than obligation. She appeared in the kitchen doorway, just as Jace was teaching Milo how to whisk the sauce without creating a flour catastrophe. Father and son moved together with practiced choreography, Milo standing on a step stool beside the stove, his tongue poking out in concentration as he stirred. Gentle circles, Jace instructed. The sauce wants to come together slowly, like it's making up its mind. Like when you're deciding to trust someone new? Milo asked, his 7-year-old wisdom once again cutting straight to the heart of things. Exactly like that, Jace agreed, catching Elena's eye over his son's head. Elena had intended to observe from a safe distance, perhaps offer token assistance with setting the table, but found herself pulled into their orbit. Milo immediately conscripted her into service, assigning her the critical task of taste testing. The roasted vegetables to ensure they were perfectly perfect, his highest culinary praise. "These carrots are amazing," she said, surprised by how long it had been since she'd eaten anything that hadn't come from a takeout container. "What did you do to them?" "Honey and thyme," Jace explained. "The secret is roasting them hot enough to caramelize the edges, but not so hot that they lose their sweetness." As he talked, Elena found herself studying his hands sure and gentle as they moved around her kitchen, transforming expensive appliances into tools for creating comfort. There was something deeply satisfying about watching someone who truly knew what they were doing, whose competence was expressed through care rather than performance. They ate in the breakfast nook overlooking the garden, and for the first time in 5 years, the space felt purposeful. Milo filled the silences with observations about everything from Augustus, the peacock's daily routine, to his theory that all vegetables would taste better if they were shaped like dinosaurs. Elena found herself laughing, actually laughing at his running commentary on life. "Elena," Milo said seriously, "do you ever get lonely in this big house?" "Milo," Jace warned gently, but Elena held up a hand. "It's okay," she said. "Yes, sometimes I do get lonely." "That's what I thought. Houses need people to make them happy. Even fancy houses." Milo took a bite of chicken and chewed thoughtfully. "My daddy gets lonely sometimes too, but he tries to hide it because he thinks I don't notice." Elena glanced at Jace, who had gone very still. "Is that right?" "Grown-ups do that," Milo continued with the matter-of-fact tone of someone stating obvious truths. "They think kids don't understand sad stuff, but we do. We just don't know how to fix it yet." The honesty in the room was suddenly overwhelming. Elena realized she was sitting with two people who understood loss in ways that most of her wealthy acquaintances, for all their sophistication, never would. There was something both humbling and liberating about that recognition. After dinner, while Jace insisted on cleaning up, Elena found herself in an unprecedented situation, entertaining a 7-year-old in a house that had been designed for elegant adult gatherings. Milo explored with the careful reverence of someone who understood that beautiful things required respect, but his curiosity was irrepressible. "What's this room for?" he asked, peering into the formal living room with its museum-quality furniture and artwork. "I'm not really sure anymore," Elena admitted. "It used to be for entertaining guests." "Don't you have guests?" "Not really." Milo considered this. "That's silly. This room is too pretty to just look at. It wants to be used." He was right. Of course, the room had been designed for gatherings, for conversation and laughter, and the kind of comfortable socializing that Elena had gradually eliminated from her life. She'd told herself it was about maintaining focus, about protecting her privacy. But standing there with Milo, she wondered if it was really about protecting herself from the possibility of caring about people who might leave. Want to see something cool? Elena asked, surprising herself. She led him to a cabinet in the corner and opened it to reveal a collection of board games, some vintage, some new, all untouched since she'd bought them in a fit of optimism shortly after moving in. There was Scrabble and Monopoly, chess and checkers, even a few she'd forgotten purchasing. Wow, Milo breathed. Are these all yours? They are now, Elena said. I bought them thinking I might have people over to play, but you didn't have people, Milo finished with a straightforward compassion that seemed to be his specialty. No, I didn't. Milo pulled out a box of Candyland, its colors bright and cheerful against the sophisticated neutrals of the room. This is my favorite. It's not too hard, and everybody can win sometimes. They set up the game on the coffee table that had never been used for anything more casual than displaying art books. Elena couldn't remember the last time she'd sat on her own living room floor, but there she was, cross-legged on an antique Persian rug, moving a plastic gingerbread man around a board designed for children. When Jace finished in the kitchen and came looking for them, he found Elena and Milo in heated debate over whether landing on Queen Frosting was lucky or unlucky, depending on where you were in the game. Elena was arguing for the strategic benefits of setbacks that ultimately led to better positioning, while Milo maintained that being stuck was never good, even if it worked out later. That sounds like a very grown-up conversation for Candyland, Jace observed, settling onto the floor beside them. Elena's really smart, Milo announced. She thinks about games the same way she thinks about business stuff. How do you know how I think about business? Elena asked, amused. Because you get the same look on your face, like you're solving a puzzle that other people can't see yet. The observation was so astute that Elena felt momentarily transparent. This child saw everything, noticed patterns that adults had learned to ignore or overlook. They finished the game with Elena winning, though she suspected Milo had made a few strategic errors on purpose. As they packed up the pieces, he yawned widely, and Jace recognized the signs of an overtired 7-year-old approaching meltdown territory. Time for bed, buddy, he said. We've had a big day. Can we play again tomorrow? Milo asked Elena hopefully. If you want to, she said, and meant it. As Jace carried a drowsy Milo toward the apartment, Elena found herself standing alone in her living room, which now showed evidence of actual used game pieces that hadn't quite made it back into the box. Cushions askew from sitting on the floor, the lingering warmth of shared laughter. Later that night, she couldn't sleep. Instead, she found herself walking through her house, seeing it through Milo's eyes, rooms too pretty to just look at, spaces designed for connection that had been carefully preserved in sterile perfection. In her bedroom closet, pushed far, back behind her business suits and elegant evening wear that rarely saw use, she found it, a small cedar box she hadn't opened in 5 years. Inside, wrapped in tissue paper, was a teddy bear that had belonged to her daughter Sophie. It was brown and soft and worn from countless bedtime hugs, with one ear that was slightly smaller than the other, from a repair job Elena had done when Sophie was 3. She'd hidden it away after the accident, unable to bear the sight of it, but unable to throw it away. Now, holding it again, she felt the familiar ache of loss, but something else too, a recognition that hiding from reminders of love didn't make the love disappear. It just made life smaller and more hollow. The teddy bear represented everything she'd lost, but also everything she'd been capable of feeling. As she held it against her chest, Elena realized that Milo and Jace weren't just employees who'd moved into her garage apartment. They were the first people in 5 years who'd made her remember what it felt like to hope for tomorrow, to look forward to shared meals and silly games, and the simple pleasure of not being alone. For the first time since the accident, she fell, asleep holding something soft and warm, and dreamed not of the life she'd lost, but of the life that might still be possible. 3 weeks into their new arrangement, Elena found herself doing something she hadn't done in years, looking forward to coming home. Her days at Nexus Dynamics had become more focused, more efficient, as if having a reason to leave the office. By 6 o'clock had clarified her priorities. The board meetings that used to stretch indefinitely now concluded with decisive action, and she'd started delegating responsibilities she'd been clutching out of habit rather than necessity. The transformation in her household was equally dramatic. The kitchen hummed with life as Jace established routines that accommodated both his professional standards and Milo's enthusiastic participation. Breakfast had become a production involving fresh fruit, homemade granola, and Milo's increasingly sophisticated commentary on flavor combinations. Dinners were exercises in gentle conversation, with Elena gradually learning to navigate the unfamiliar territory of domestic harmony. It was during one of these dinners that inspiration struck, unexpected and powerful as a lightning bolt. "Mr. Rodriguez looked really tired today," Milo was saying, stabbing his green beans with the focused determination of someone fulfilling a vegetable obligation. His food truck ran out of the good stuff by lunch, and he had to tell people he was sorry. Elena paused, her fork halfway to her mouth. "Mr. Rodriguez? He parks outside my school sometimes," Milo explained. "He makes really good tacos, but he says business is hard because he can't afford the fancy ingredients that people want." Jace looked up from his plate. "Milo, you shouldn't bother people with too many questions." I wasn't bothering him. "He likes talking to me. He said I remind him of his grandson back in Mexico." Milo's face grew serious. "But he looked sad today, like when you get worried about money stuff." Elena set down her fork, her mind already racing. She'd built her company on the principle that technology should solve real problems. But lately, Nexus Dynamics had been focused on increasingly abstract innovations, apps that made marginal improvements to processes that were already efficient, platforms that connected people who were already connected. When was the last time they'd tackled something that mattered to people like Mr. Rodriguez? "Tell me more about these food trucks," she said. Over the next hour, as they finished dinner and moved to the living room that had become their unofficial evening gathering place, Elena learned about an entire ecosystem she'd never noticed despite driving past it every day. Milo painted a picture of hardworking people serving communities that weren't well served by traditional restaurants, struggling with everything from permit issues to supply chain challenges to equipment maintenance they couldn't afford. "There's Mrs. Kim, who makes amazing Korean barbecue, but her truck broke down last month and she couldn't work for 2 weeks." Milo recounted with a detailed memory that children brought to stories that captured their imagination. "And Mr. Sam, who does the best fish tacos, but he says the city makes it really hard to find good spots to park." Jace watched Elena's face as she absorbed this information. Recognizing the expression Milo had identified, the look of someone solving a puzzle that others couldn't see yet. Something was crystallizing in her mind, connections forming between her resources and these challenges. "What if we helped them?" Elena said suddenly. "Helped how?" Jace asked. Elena stood and began pacing, the way she did when an idea was taking shape. "Nexus has resources, capital, technology, logistics expertise. What if we created a program to support small food entrepreneurs? Not just trucks, but anyone trying to build a food business in underserved communities." She was thinking out loud now, the way she did in board meetings when a strategy was emerging. "We could provide equipment leasing, help with permits and regulations, maybe even develop an app that helps customers find these vendors. Create a network that benefits everyone." "That sounds amazing," Jace said carefully, "but wouldn't your shareholders want you focused on more profitable ventures?" Elena paused in her pacing. "Nexus is profitable enough to take some risks on projects that matter. And this could be profitable too, eventually. But more importantly, she trailed off, searching for words to explain something she was just beginning to understand herself. More importantly, Milo finished for her. It would help people like Mr. Rodriguez not be sad anymore. Exactly. Elena pulled out her phone and began making notes, her excitement building as the possibilities expanded. She could see it clearly now, a comprehensive support system that would address the real barriers facing small food entrepreneurs. It was ambitious and complex, and exactly the kind of challenge that had driven her to build Nexus in the first place. The business plan she sketched that night was more detailed than anything she'd developed in months. By the time she finally went to bed, she had filled 17 pages with ideas, potential partnerships, implementation strategies, and financial projections. More importantly, she had a sense of purpose that had been missing from her work for longer than she cared to admit. The next morning, she called an emergency meeting with her executive team. Margaret's surprise was evident when Elena announced the agenda. Community Food Initiative Strategic Planning Session. "I'm sorry," said David Chun, her chief technology officer. "Did you say food trucks?" "I said food entrepreneurs," Elena corrected. "Small business owners who are serving communities that need them, but who lack the resources to scale or even maintain consistent operations." She presented her research with the same thoroughness she brought to any business proposition, but her team could sense something different in her energy. This wasn't a calculated move to enter a new market segment. This was personal in a way that made them pay attention. "The market opportunity is substantial," she explained, clicking through slides she'd created before dawn. "The food truck industry alone is worth over $1 billion annually, but it's fragmented and underserved by traditional business support systems. We have the technology to create efficiencies, the capital to provide equipment and startup costs, and the network to help these entrepreneurs reach customers and suppliers." Her CFO, Patricia Williams, raised the obvious question. "What's our angle here, Elena? This sounds more like philanthropy than business development." Alana had anticipated this challenge. "It's both." Nexus was built on the principle that profitable businesses could also create positive social impact. We've gotten away from that lately, focusing on incremental improvements for users who already have plenty of options. This would be different, using our resources to solve real problems for people who need solutions. She clicked to her final slide, which showed financial projections and social impact metrics side by side. This isn't charity disguised as business. It's business with a conscience, and I think our customers and investors will respond to that authenticity. The room fell silent as her team absorbed the proposal. Elena could see the wheels turning, some impressed by the scope and potential, others skeptical about the departure from their current strategy. "How did you develop this concept so quickly?" asked Marcus Thompson, her head of product development. Elena hesitated, thinking of Milo's innocent observations about Mr. Rodriguez's struggles. Sometimes the best business ideas come from paying attention to problems right in front of us that we've learned to ignore. That afternoon, she drove to Milo's school for the first time, arriving early enough to observe the food truck ecosystem he'd described. She watched Mr. Rodriguez serve a steady stream of customers from a truck that had clearly seen better days, noting how he apologized for items that had sold out, how he carefully counted change from a cash box held together with electrical tape. When Milo emerged from school and spotted her car, his face lit up with surprise and delight. "Elena, what are you doing here?" "Research," she said, surprising herself by how natural it felt to include him in her business thinking. "Want to introduce me to Mr. Rodriguez?" The introduction was pure Milo enthusiastic, unfiltered, and somehow perfectly diplomatic. "Mr. Rodriguez, this is Elena. She's really smart about business stuff, and she wants to help food truck people not be sad about money anymore." Mr. Rodriguez, a weathered man in his 50s with kind eyes and careful English, looked skeptical until Elena began asking thoughtful questions about his challenges. His answers confirmed everything her research had suggested and added layers of complexity. She hadn't considered health department regulations that seemed designed to discourage rather than ensure safety. Equipment suppliers who preyed on desperate entrepreneurs, locations that charged exorbitant fees for parking permits. "The work is good," he said finally. "I love feeding people, making them happy with food. But the rest—" He gestured helplessly at the bureaucratic maze that surrounded his simple desire to serve good tacos. As they drove home, Elena felt the conviction that had been building all day crystallize into certainty. This project wasn't just a good business opportunity. It was necessary. She had the resources to make a real difference in the lives of people like Mr. Rodriguez. And more importantly, she had finally found a way to use her success for something that mattered beyond profit margins and market share. "You're getting that look again," Milo observed from the back seat. "What look?" "The puzzle-solving look. But this time it's different. This time you look happy about the puzzle." Elena caught his eye in the rearview mirror and smiled. "You know what, Milo? I think you're right." That evening, as Jace prepared dinner and filled them in on his own research into local food entrepreneurship, Elena felt something she hadn't experienced in years: the excitement of building something meaningful from the ground up. She was remembering why she'd started Nexus in the first place, not to accumulate wealth or power, but to solve problems that made people's lives better. The food truck project would become more than a business initiative. It would become a bridge between the isolated world she'd constructed and the community that surrounded her, a way to use her privilege for something larger than self-protection. More importantly, it would give her something to share with Jace and Milo beyond employer-employee formalities. They would be partners in creating something good, united by a purpose that transcended their unusual living arrangement. For the first time in 5 years, Elena Rowe was building toward a future, instead of hiding from the past. The food truck project launched with the kind of precision that had made Elena famous in the tech world, but also with a warmth that surprised everyone involved. Within 6 weeks, Nexus had established partnerships with 3 local food entrepreneurs, providing them with equipment upgrades, permit assistance, and access to premium suppliers at bulk pricing. Mr. Rodriguez was their first success story. His new truck featured state-of-the-art equipment and a cheerful design that Milo had helped choose, and his daily revenue had tripled. Elena found herself spending more time in the field than in boardrooms, discovering that she genuinely enjoyed the problem-solving aspects of small business challenges. Each entrepreneur presented unique obstacles that required creative solutions, and she was energized by work that produced immediately visible results rather than quarterly projections. But success brought unexpected complications. The trouble began with a phone call from Patricia Williams on a Thursday morning when Elena was reviewing supplier contracts in her study. Milo was at school, and Jace was experimenting with Autumn. Menu ideas in the kitchen, the house filled with the comforting aroma of caramelized onions and fresh herbs. "We need to talk," Patricia said without preamble. "The board is asking questions about your recent resource allocation." Elena felt her stomach tighten. What kind of questions? The kind that suggest they think you're having some sort of midlife crisis and using company resources as expensive therapy. The accusation stung, partly because Elena worried there might be some truth to it. Was her enthusiasm for the food truck project authentic business instinct, or was she unconsciously trying to fill the emotional void in her life with work that felt meaningful? "The numbers support the initiative," Elena said carefully. "We're seeing strong community response and positive media coverage. That's not the point, and you know it. Marcus has been asking around about your new domestic situation. Word is getting out that you're living with your chef and his kid, and people are connecting that to this sudden interest in food entrepreneurship." Elena's hands went cold. My personal life is not the board's concern. It is when it appears to be influencing business decisions. Elena, they're scheduling a closed-door session to discuss your judgment. Some of them are worried you're not thinking clearly. After ending the call, Elena sat in her study, feeling the familiar walls of isolation reassembling themselves. She'd been naive to think she could maintain her newfound happiness without consequences. In her world, personal connections were viewed as weaknesses, emotional decisions as signs of instability. That evening's dinner felt different. Elena was distracted, her responses to Milo's chatter about school automatic rather than engaged. Jace noticed immediately. Her smile was performing rather than spontaneous, her attention divided. "Everything okay?" he asked after Milo had gone to start his homework. Elena considered deflecting with her usual professional composure, but something about Jace's genuine concern made her want to be honest. There might be some complications at work. Related to the food truck project? Related to perceptions about why I'm supporting the food truck project. Elena pushed food around her plate, her appetite gone. Apparently, some people think. My business judgment has been compromised by personal factors. Jace was quiet for a long moment, understanding the implications. They think you're making decisions based on emotion rather than logic. Something like that. And they think Milo and I are the source of that emotion. Elena nodded, unable to meet his eyes. The unspoken question hung between them. What would she do if forced to choose between her company and the life they'd been building together? The answer came sooner than expected. 2 days later, Elena received formal notification that the board would be meeting to review her recent leadership decisions and discuss appropriate parameters for future strategic initiatives. The language was corporate speak for an intervention, a polite way of questioning her competence without directly challenging her authority. Margaret delivered the news with the careful neutrality she maintained in difficult situations, but Elena could see the concern in her assistant's eyes. They both understood what was at stake. That evening, Elena found herself in the unusual position of needing comfort rather than providing structure. She discovered Jace and Milo in the kitchen, working on homework that involved measuring ingredients for a math lesson about fractions. The domestic scene that had become precious to her suddenly felt fragile, temporary. "Elena," Milo looked up from his worksheet. "We're making pretend cookies to learn about halves and quarters. Want to help?" She settled beside them at the kitchen island, grateful for the distraction of simple arithmetic and Milo's running commentary on why chocolate chip cookies were mathematically superior to oatmeal raisin. But her mind kept drifting to the board meeting, to the potential consequences of choosing heart over strategy. Later, after Milo was asleep, she and Jace sat in the living room, where they'd played their first game of Candyland, the space that had once felt too formal for every day. Use now held the comfortable informality of shared evenings. "You're scared," Jace observed quietly. "I'm being practical," Elena corrected, though they both knew it was the same thing. "I built Nexus over 15 years. I can't risk losing it because I got emotionally attached to a project." "Is that what you think happened? You got emotionally attached?" Elena considered the question. "I think I rediscovered what it feels like to care about something beyond abstract success. That's dangerous in my world. Only if you let other people define what success means." The observation was so simple and yet so profound that Elena felt something shift in her thinking. She'd spent years accepting that business success required emotional distance, that caring too much about outcomes beyond profit was a luxury she couldn't afford. But what if that assumption was wrong? What if the very thing that made her vulnerable also made her stronger? "The board meeting is Tuesday," she said finally. "What will you tell them?" Elena looked around the room that had come alive with their presence, thought about Mr. Rodriguez's new truck and the other entrepreneurs who were building better lives through the program she'd created. She thought about Milo's innocent wisdom and Jace's quiet strength, about the family they'd accidentally created in the space between her loneliness and their need. "I'm going to tell them the truth," she said. "That the best business decisions I've made in 5 years came from remembering that success without meaning is just expensive emptiness." Jace smiled, and Elena felt something she hadn't experienced since before the accident, the certainty that she was exactly where she belonged, doing exactly what mattered most. The battle for her company was about to begin, but for the first time in years, she knew what she was fighting for. Elena's preparation for the board meeting consumed the weekend, but it was unlike any business preparation she'd done before. Instead of crafting defensive strategies and protective talking points, she found herself digging deeper into something she'd kept buried for 5 years, the truth about why she'd really built Nexus, and why she'd lost sight of that purpose until Milo and Jace had reminded her what caring looked like. The discovery began accidentally. While researching the full scope of her charitable giving to strengthen her case for the food truck initiative, Elena opened a file cabinet in her study that she hadn't touched since moving into the mansion. Buried beneath corporate documents and investment portfolios was a folder marked Personal Projects minus 2019 in her own handwriting. Inside were bank statements, donation receipts, and correspondence that painted a picture she'd forgotten. For years, even before meeting Jace and Milo, Elena had been quietly using her wealth to support exactly the kind of community initiatives that the board now questioned. Anonymous donations to school nutrition programs, grants to support small food businesses in underserved neighborhoods, scholarships for culinary students from low-income families. The amounts were staggering millions of dollars distributed through careful intermediaries and shell organizations to ensure her involvement remained hidden. She'd been funding food security programs across Los Angeles without ever taking credit, driven by memories of her own childhood, when her immigrant grandmother had struggled to keep her fed after her parents died. But the most shocking discovery was a document she'd completely forgotten, the original business plan for Nexus Dynamics, written 15 years ago when she was still driven by idealism rather than market dominance. The mission statement she'd crafted then read, to leverage technology in service of human dignity, creating profitable solutions to problems that matter to real people in real communities. Somewhere along the way, she'd lost sight of that mission. The success of Nexus had become its own purpose, growth for growth's sake rather than growth in service of something larger. The food truck project wasn't a departure from her company's values. It was a return to them. Armed with this revelation, Elena spent Sunday evening preparing a presentation unlike any she'd given before. Instead of defensive justifications, she would present a comprehensive vision for Nexus's future that positioned the food truck initiative as the first step in a broader transformation back to the company's founding principles. But Monday morning brought a complication that changed everything. Margaret's voice on the intercom was carefully controlled, but Elena detected an undercurrent of urgency. "Ms. Rowe, there's a gentleman here to see Mr. Ramirez. He says he's family." Elena found Jace in the kitchen, his face pale as he spoke with a man in an expensive suit who radiated the quiet authority of someone accustomed to getting his way. Milo sat at the breakfast bar, confusion clearing his eyes as he sensed the tension without understanding its source. "Elena, this is Robert Morrison," Jace said, his voice tight. "Maria's father." Elena's stomach dropped. She'd known that Maria's parents had been absent from Jace and Milo's life, but she'd assumed it was by mutual agreement. The reality, as it emerged over the next hour, was far more complicated. Robert Morrison was a successful attorney who disapproved of his daughter's marriage to a chef. He'd maintained minimal contact with Jace and Milo after Maria's death, providing only token support during the worst of their financial struggles. Now, with reports of their improved circumstances reaching him through mutual acquaintances, he'd decided to reassert his parental rights. "I've been monitoring the situation," he said with the cold precision of someone accustomed to legal maneuvering. My grandson is living in an unconventional arrangement with a woman of significant means, and I have concerns about the appropriate custody environment. Custody? Jace's voice cracked. You've seen Milo maybe 6 times since Maria died. You can't just... I can and I will, Robert interrupted. I have resources now that I didn't have then. A stable home environment, educational opportunities, connections that will serve Milo's future interests. Elena watched Milo's face as he processed this conversation, seeing the fear and confusion that came with adult conflicts beyond his understanding. Her protective instincts, dormant for years, roared to life. Mr. Morrison, she said carefully, Milo is thriving here. He's happy, he's doing well in school, and he has a loving relationship with his father. Ms. Rowe, with respect, you're part of the problem I'm trying to solve. My grandson shouldn't be living as a dependent in someone else's household, no matter how generous the arrangement. The legal papers he produced were professionally prepared and devastatingly thorough. Robert had documented Jace's financial instability, his employment gaps, and what he characterized as his inability to provide appropriate housing for his son. The petition for custody modification painted Jace as a well-meaning but inadequate parent who'd been forced to rely on the charity of strangers. This is ridiculous, Elena said, but even as she spoke, she could see how the situation would appear to a family court judge. A struggling single father living in his employer's apartment, dependent on her generosity for housing and stability. I'm not trying to be cruel, Robert said, his tone softening slightly. But Milo deserves better than uncertainty. I can provide him with educational opportunities, travel, exposure to culture and ideas that will expand his horizons. He's 7 years old, Jace said desperately. He needs love and stability, not networking opportunities. He needs both, Robert replied, and currently he has neither. The custody hearing was scheduled for the following week, which meant Elena's board meeting, originally her primary. Concern suddenly became secondary to a battle for Milo's future. As Robert left with promises to return with formal court documents, Elena found herself facing a crisis that made corporate politics seem trivial by comparison. That evening, she made a decision that would have seemed impossible a few months earlier. She canceled her board meeting preparation and instead spent the night researching family law, consulting with the best attorneys money could hire, and developing a strategy to help Jace keep his son. The irony wasn't lost on her. At the moment, when her own company's board was questioning her judgment and priorities, she was doubling down on exactly the kind of personal involvement they found concerning. But as she watched Jace try to explain the situation to Milo in terms that wouldn't terrify a 7-year-old, Elena realized that some things mattered more than business success. She'd spent 5 years protecting herself from caring too much about anything. Now, faced with the possibility of losing the family she'd accidentally found, she discovered that caring wasn't a weakness. It was the source of a strength she'd forgotten she possessed. The secret donation records she'd discovered represented more than financial generosity. They were evidence of her true character, proof that her current actions weren't the result of compromised judgment, but of returning to her authentic self. The woman who'd been anonymously feeding children and supporting entrepreneurs for years wasn't having a breakdown, she was having a breakthrough. As she began planning her defense of both her company and her family, Elena felt the familiar excitement of a complex problem that demanded everything she had to give. But this time, the stakes weren't quarterly profits or market share. This time, she was fighting for love, for the right to choose family over isolation, for the radical idea that success meant nothing without people to share it with. The battle ahead would test everything she'd learned about herself since that first unexpected hug from a 7-year-old boy who'd seen through her defenses to the lonely woman underneath. But for the first time in years, Elena knew exactly who she was fighting for and why the fight mattered more than winning. The week leading up to the custody hearing felt like preparing for multiple wars simultaneously. Elena's corporate attorneys worked around the clock, developing her defense strategy for the board meeting, which had been rescheduled for the day after the family court proceedings. Meanwhile, the family law specialist she'd hired, Catherine Walsh, known for her success in protecting parents' rights, built their case with methodical precision. Elena had never experienced anything like the raw fear that came with the possibility of losing Milo. It was different from business anxiety, deeper and more primal. She found herself watching him with desperate attention, memorizing the way he hummed while doing homework, how he always saved the last bite of dessert for Jace, the careful way he arranged his stuffed elephant each night before bed. "You're staring again," Milo observed Tuesday evening as they worked on a jigsaw puzzle in the living room. He'd been quieter since his grandfather's visit, processing the adult emotions swirling around him with the serious attention he brought to complex problems. "Sorry," Elena said, forcing herself to focus on finding puzzle pieces instead of studying his face for signs of distress. "Are you worried about me going to live with Grandpa Robert?" The direct question caught Elena off guard. She and Jace had tried to shield Milo from the worst of their fears, but children had radar for adult anxiety that penetrated even the most careful protective measures. "I'm worried about you being anywhere you don't want to be," Elena said honestly. Milo considered this while fitting together pieces of a castle tower. "Grandpa Robert seems nice, but he doesn't really know me. He asked me what my favorite food was, and when I said mac and cheese, he looked like that was wrong somehow." "There's nothing wrong with mac and cheese," Elena assured him. "That's what I thought. But he said when I lived with him, I'd learn to appreciate more sophisticated flavors." Milo wrinkled his nose. "What if I don't want to be more sophisticated?" Elena's heart broke a little. At 7, Milo was being asked to consider abandoning his authentic self for someone else's vision of who he should become. She knew that feeling intimately, the pressure to perform a version of yourself that met other people's expectations, while slowly losing track of who you really were. "Sophistication is overrated," she said firmly. "The best people I know are the ones who remember how to enjoy simple things." Jace appeared in the doorway, looking exhausted from another day of depositions and document reviews. Catherine Walsh had been thorough in her preparation, interviewing everyone from Milo's teachers to their former neighbors to Mrs. Chun, building a comprehensive picture of Jace's parenting competence and Milo's well-being. "How did it go today?" Elena asked. "Good, I think. Catherine says we have a strong case." Milo's teacher gave a statement about how well he's doing in school, how happy he seems. The school counselor said she's never seen any signs of neglect or instability. Jace sat heavily in his chair, running his hands through his hair. "But Robert's lawyers are good too. They're painting me as financially irresponsible, overly dependent on your generosity." Elena felt a familiar surge of anger at the injustice. "You're not dependent, you're employed. You earn your place here every day. I know that, and you know that, but from the outside." Jace trailed off, gesturing helplessly at their circumstances. It was true that their arrangement looked unconventional to people who didn't understand the emotional foundation beneath the practical details. Elena employed Jace as her chef, but they lived more like family than employer and employee. The lines had blurred gradually, naturally, until their relationship existed in a space that didn't fit traditional categories. "What if I testified?" Elena said suddenly. "Absolutely not," Jace replied immediately. "You've already done too much. Getting involved in a custody battle would just give your board more ammunition against you." "Maybe I don't care what my board thinks. Elena, you can't risk your company for us." But Elena was already thinking through the implications. Her testimony could establish the stability and permanence of their arrangement, demonstrate that Milo wasn't dependent on charity, but part of a chosen family that happened to be economically untraditional. More importantly, it would force her to publicly defend the life they'd built together, which might help her clarify her priorities for the board meeting that would follow. That night, she called Catherine Walsh and insisted on being added to their witness list, despite the attorney's concerns about the optics. This case isn't just about custody, Elena explained. It's about the right to choose your own definition of family. Thursday evening brought an unexpected gift. Milo himself provided their strongest evidence. Catherine had suggested he write a letter to the judge, a common practice in custody cases that allowed children to express their preferences without the pressure of courtroom testimony. Milo approached the task with characteristic seriousness, sitting at the kitchen table with his best writing pencil and a piece of Elena's personal stationery that made him feel official. He worked for over an hour, tongue poking out in concentration, occasionally asking Jace or Elena how to spell particularly challenging words. When he finished, he read his letter aloud with the pride of someone who'd completed important work. Dear Judge, my name is Milo Ramirez, and I am 7 years old. My grandpa Robert wants me to come live with him because he thinks my daddy can't take good care of me, but that's not true. My daddy takes really good care of me. He makes me eat vegetables, even when I don't want to, and he helps me with homework, and he reads me stories every night. When my mom died, I was really sad, but my daddy was sad too, and we took care of each other. Then we got to live with Elena, and she's not just daddy's boss, she's our friend. She plays games with me and listens when I talk about school, and she never makes me feel like I'm too little to understand things. I know Grandpa Robert has a lot of money and a big house, but I don't need those things. I need people who love me the way I am right now, not the way they think I should be. My daddy and Elena love me like that. I want to stay with my family. Thank you for reading my letter. Sincerely, Milo Ramirez. Peace. Elena says you have a really hard job and she hopes you have a nice day. The letter was perfect in its innocence and devastating in its clarity. Elena felt tears threatening as Milo carefully folded the paper and placed it in the envelope Catherine had provided. That's beautiful, buddy, Jace said, his voice thick with emotion. Do you think the judge will understand? Milo asked. I think anyone who reads that letter will understand exactly what they need to know, Elena assured him. Friday morning, Elena made one final decision that surprised everyone, including herself. She called an emergency board meeting for that afternoon, before the custody hearing, not after. I want to address their concerns while I still have the clarity that comes from knowing what really matters, she explained to a bewildered Margaret. Win or lose on Monday, I want them to hear from the real me, not the defensive version I become when I feel attacked. The presentation she prepared wasn't a defense of her recent decisions, but a manifesto about the future of Nexus Dynamics. She would use her secret philanthropic history as evidence that her current direction wasn't a departure from sound business judgment, but a return to the values that had made Nexus successful in the first place. More importantly, she would make it clear that she was prepared to sacrifice her position rather than compromise the family she'd found. Sometimes the most powerful negotiating position was the willingness to walk away from the table entirely. As she put the finishing touches on her presentation, Elena felt the same calm determination she'd experienced before every major business victory of her career. But this time, she wasn't fighting for market share or quarterly profits. She was fighting for the right to choose love over fear, connection over isolation, meaning over empty success. The battles ahead would determine not just the custody of one 7-year-old boy or the leadership of one tech company, but the shape of the life Elena would live going forward. For the first time in years, she knew exactly what kind of life that should be. The Nexus Dynamics boardroom had never felt smaller or more hostile. Elena faced 12 of the most powerful business leaders in Los Angeles, people she'd worked with for years, who now regarded her with expressions ranging from concern to barely concealed skepticism. At the head of the polished conference table, Board Chairman William Hartwell maintained the neutral demeanor that had made him effective in corporate crisis management. But Elena could read the disappointment in his eyes. "Elena, we've called this meeting because we're concerned about some recent decisions that seem to diverge from Nexus's established strategic direction," he began. "We'd like to understand your thinking and discuss the company's future." Elena stood, her presentation materials arranged with the same precision she'd brought to every major business negotiation of her career. But this time felt different, not because the stakes were lower, but because she finally knew what she was really fighting for. "Before we discuss the future, I want to share something about the past that will provide important context for my recent decisions." She activated the wall display and began with a slide that would shock them all. A comprehensive overview of her anonymous charitable giving over the past decade. "For 10 years, I've been using my personal wealth to fund exactly the kind of community initiatives that some of you now question. Food security programs, small business development, educational scholarships, all anonymous, all substantial, all aligned with the values that originally drove me to create Nexus." The room fell silent as slide after slide revealed the scope of her hidden philanthropy. Patricia Williams leaned forward, studying the financial data with the focused attention she brought to quarterly reports. "These donations total more than $40 million, she said in amazement. $43.7 million, to be precise," Elena confirmed. "The food truck initiative isn't a departure from my core values. It's the first time I've been honest about them publicly." She clicked to the next slide, the original Nexus business plan from 15 years ago, with its idealistic mission statement about leveraging technology for human dignity. "We've lost sight of why we built this company. We've become so focused on growth and profitability that we've forgotten our original purpose." Board member David Chun raised his hand. "Elena, no one questions your charitable instincts, but using company resources for social initiatives requires board approval. That's basic corporate governance." "You're absolutely right," Elena agreed, "which is why I'm proposing a formal restructuring of Nexus's mission to explicitly include social impact alongside financial returns. The food truck project would become the pilot program for a new division focused on community development through technology." For the next 20 minutes, Elena presented the most comprehensive business case of her career. She showed how companies with authentic social missions outperformed purely profit-driven competitors in both employee retention and customer loyalty. She demonstrated how the food truck initiative had already generated positive media coverage worth millions in marketing value. She outlined expansion possibilities that could position Nexus as a leader in the emerging field of conscious capitalism. But more importantly, she spoke with a passion and conviction that had been missing from her leadership for years. "I know some of you think I've been compromised by personal relationships," she said, addressing the elephant in the room directly. "You're right. I have been compromised by remembering what it feels like to care about something beyond market share. Compromised by rediscovering that business success means nothing if it's built on personal emptiness." William Hartwell spoke carefully. "Elena, we're not questioning your charitable instincts or your personal relationships. We're concerned about the appearance of conflicts of interest and the potential for emotional decision-making to cloud your business judgment." Elena had anticipated this challenge, and her response was ready. "The best business decisions I've ever made came from emotional intelligence, not emotional detachment. When I built Nexus, I was driven by passion for solving problems that mattered to me personally. That passion is what made this company successful, and losing sight of it is what's made our recent growth feel hollow." She clicked to her final slide, projected revenue and impact metrics for the expanded social mission. "I'm not asking you to choose between profitability and purpose. I'm asking you to remember that the most sustainable businesses are built on both." Marcus Thompson, who'd been quietly reviewing the presentation materials, finally spoke. This is impressive work, Elena, but it doesn't address our primary concern. Your lifestyle has become unconventional, living with your employee and his child, making business decisions that directly benefit them. It raises questions about your objectivity. Elena felt the familiar anger rise, but channeled it into clarity instead of defensiveness. My lifestyle has become authentic. For 5 years after losing my family, I made decisions based on fear and isolation. Those decisions may have looked professional, but they were actually the result of compromised judgment. Judgment compromised by grief and emotional numbness. She paused, making eye contact with each board member. Jace Ramirez and his son aren't my employees who happen to live with me. They're my family, chosen deliberately by someone who remembers what family means. And that choice has made me a better leader, not a worse one. The room erupted in mirrored conversations as board members processed this direct challenge to their assumptions. Elena waited, knowing that the next few minutes would determine not just her future with Nexus, but whether she'd have the opportunity to protect the family she'd fought so hard to build. Patricia Williams was the first to speak. Elena, if we accept your proposal for restructuring Nexus's mission, what guarantees do we have that future decisions will be made in the company's best interests rather than your personal interests? The same guarantee you've always had, Elena replied. My track record. I've built this company into a billion-dollar enterprise by making good decisions based on solid analysis and strategic thinking. The only thing that's changed is that I now remember why success matters not as an end in itself, but as a means to create positive impact. William Hartwell called for a brief recess, and Elena found herself standing alone in the hallway outside the boardroom, checking her phone for updates from Catherine Walsh about the custody hearing scheduled for Monday. The timing was brutal regardless of how this board meeting concluded. She'd have less than 3 days to prepare for a legal battle that could tear apart the family she just publicly claimed. When the board reconvened, their decision surprised her. We're prepared to support your expanded mission, William announced, contingent on specific oversight provisions and performance metrics to ensure accountability. Elena felt a surge of victory, but it was tempered by the knowledge that her real battle was still ahead. Winning the board's support meant nothing if she lost Milo. There's one more thing, William continued. We want you to take a leave of absence to address your personal situation, the custody hearing, the media tension around your living arrangements. It's a distraction from business operations. The suggestion felt like a trap disguised as support. How long a leave? Until the custody matter is resolved and the media attention dies down. Patricia can serve as interim CEO. Elena realized they were offering her a face-saving way to step back from daily operations while they evaluated whether her new approach would actually work. It was a reasonable compromise that protected both her interests and theirs, but it also meant she'd be fighting the custody battle without the full authority of her position. I accept, she said, surprising herself with how easily the decision came. With one condition, I remain actively involved in the food truck initiative during my leave. That project succeeds or fails based on my personal engagement, not corporate oversight. Agreed, William said after a brief consultation with the other board members. As Elena left the Nexus building that afternoon, she felt simultaneously victorious and vulnerable. She'd preserved her vision for the company and maintained her leadership role, but she'd also publicly staked everything on the unconventional family she'd built with Jace and Milo. The real test would come Monday morning in family court, where the stakes were infinitely higher than quarterly profits or corporate control. She'd fought for the right to choose love over isolation in her professional life. Now she had to fight for that same right in the most personal arena possible. Legal system's definition of what constituted a family worthy of protection. The custody hearing transcript would become the most important document in Elena's life. more significant than any business contract she'd ever signed. Because unlike corporate battles, which could be refought and renegotiated, the custody decision would be final. Win or lose, Monday would determine whether the family she'd found would survive or whether she'd spend the rest of her life wondering what might have been. As she drove home to Jace and Milo, Elena felt the weight of responsibility that came with fighting for something more important than herself. But she also felt the strength that came from finally knowing, without doubt or compromise, exactly what she was fighting for. Monday morning arrived with the crisp clarity that sometimes accompanies life-changing days. Elena woke before dawn, unable to sleep, but strangely calm as she prepared for the custody. Hearing that would determine whether the family she'd fought to build could survive legal scrutiny. The apartment above the garage was quiet. Jace and Milo were still sleeping, but she could feel the weight of their shared anxiety, even through the silence. The downtown courthouse was a monument to bureaucratic justice, all marble columns and intimidating architecture designed to remind visitors that the law operated on scales larger than individual hopes and fears. Elena arrived early, wearing a navy suit that struck the right balance between respectability and approachability. Her hair pulled back in a style that suggested competence without corporate coldness. Catherine Walsh met them in the hallway outside Family Court Division 3, her expression confident but serious. "Remember, this isn't about perfection," she told Jace quietly. "It's about what's best for Milo. We've built a strong case showing that he's thriving in your care." Robert Morrison arrived with his own legal team, two attorneys whose expensive suits and polished briefcases announced their credentials before they spoke a word. Elena watched him study their group with the calculating assessment of someone accustomed to evaluating opposition, and she felt a protective surge when his gaze lingered on Milo with what looked more like acquisition than affection. Judge Patricia Hernandez entered with the no-nonsense efficiency of someone who'd spent 15 years making decisions about children's futures. She was younger than Elena had expected, with kind eyes that suggested she understood the human cost of the legal proceedings she oversaw. The hearing began with opening statements that reduced their complex situation to competing narratives. Robert's attorney painted Jace as a well-meaning but inadequate parent who'd been forced to rely on charity from a wealthy woman whose own stability was questionable. Catherine responded by presenting evidence of Milo's happiness, academic progress, and the loving stability of his current environment. Then came the testimony that would determine everything. Robert took the stand first, speaking with the measured confidence of someone accustomed to courtroom proceedings. He outlined his financial resources, his stable home environment, and his plans for Milo's education with the thoroughness of a business presentation. When asked about his relationship with his grandson, his answers were correct, but somehow bloodless. He spoke about Milo's potential rather than his personality, his future opportunities rather than his current happiness. "Mr. Morrison," Catherine asked during cross-examination, "when did you last spend a full day with Milo?" Robert paused, clearly calculating. "It's been several months. My schedule has been demanding, but that would change if he came to live with me." "What's his favorite food?" He's 7. Children that age like pizza and hamburgers, don't they?" "What does he want to be when he grows up?" Another pause. "A successful professional of some kind. We haven't discussed specifics." Elena watched the judge's expression as Robert struggled with questions that anyone who truly knew Milo could answer instantly. The man was offering financial security and educational opportunities, but he clearly didn't know the child whose future he wanted to control. Jace's testimony was different, raw, emotional, and absolutely authentic. He spoke about bedtime stories and scraped knees, about helping with homework and teaching Milo to cook simple meals. When Catherine asked about their financial struggles, he didn't minimize them, but explained how they'd faced every challenge together. "Being Milo's father is the most important job I've ever had," he said, his voice thick with emotion. I may not be able to give him everything money can buy, but I can give him something more valuable, the certainty that he's loved exactly as he is. Robert's attorney tried to undermine Jace's testimony by emphasizing their dependence on Elena's generosity, painting their living arrangement as unstable charity rather than chosen family. But when Jace explained how they'd met Elena, how Milo's innocent kindness had brought them together, the narrative shifted from dependency to mutual support. Then it was Elena's turn. She'd testified in corporate depositions and board hearings countless times, but this felt entirely different. The stakes weren't financial or professional. They were personal in ways that made her voice tremble as she swore to tell the truth. "Ms. Rowe," Catherine began, "please describe your relationship with Milo and his father." "They're my family," Elena said simply. "Not by blood or marriage, but by choice. Milo brought light into a life I'd been living in shadow, and Jace showed me what it means to parent with both strength and tenderness." She explained how Milo's hug had broken through 5 years of careful isolation, how their presence had transformed her house from a beautiful prison into a home. When Robert's attorney suggested that her attachment to Milo was an attempt to replace the family she'd lost, Elena's response was calm but forceful. "I'm not trying to replace my daughter. No one could do that. But I've learned that love isn't. Finite opening your heart to new relationships doesn't diminish the ones you've lost." The questioning grew more aggressive as Robert's attorney probed the unconventional nature of their living arrangement, suggesting that Elena's wealth gave her inappropriate influence over custody decisions. Elena had prepared for this attack, and her response drew on everything she'd learned about authentic strength. "My resources aren't a tool for manipulation," she said. "They're a means to provide stability and opportunity for people I care about. If the court decides that Milo belongs with his grandfather, I'll respect that decision and support whatever arrangement is in his best interests." The statement wasn't strategic posturing, it was truth, and everyone in the courtroom could hear the sincerity in her voice. Elena had learned that real power came from being willing to let go, not from holding on too tightly. The final witness was unexpected, Milo himself. Judge Hernandez had read his letter and decided to speak with him privately in her chambers, away from the formal courtroom setting that might intimidate a 7-year-old. Through the closed doors, Elena could imagine him answering the judge's questions with the same honest directness he brought to everything else. When they returned to the courtroom, Milo's face was serious, but not frightened. He took his seat between Jace and Elena, and she felt him slip his small hand into hers, a gesture of trust that meant more than any legal victory could. Judge Hernandez reviewed her notes for what felt like an eternity before delivering her decision. "This case requires the court to determine what arrangement best serves Milo's interests, both immediate and long-term. I've heard testimony about financial resources, educational opportunities, and family stability from all parties." Elena held her breath, aware that the next words would determine the shape of the rest of her life. While Mr. Morrison's offer of financial security and traditional family structure has merit, the evidence clearly shows that Milo is thriving in his current environment. His academic performance, emotional well-being, and social development all indicate that his needs are being met comprehensively by his father, with significant support from Ms. Rowe. The judge paused, looking directly at Robert. Moreover, the court notes that strong family relationships cannot be purchased or imposed. They must be built through consistent presence, attention, and genuine care. The testimony suggests that, while Mr. Morrison has good intentions, he has not invested the time necessary to develop a meaningful relationship with his grandson. Elena felt Milo's hand tighten in hers as the judge continued. "Therefore, the court denies the petition for custody modification. Milo will remain in his father's care, with the understanding that Mr. Morrison is welcome to establish a more active grandparent relationship if he chooses to do so." The gavel fell with finality, and Elena felt years of protective tension release from her shoulders. They'd won not just a legal victory, but the right to continue building the unconventional family that had saved them all from different forms of loneliness. As they left the courthouse, Milo looked up at Elena with the satisfied expression of someone whose faith in justice had been confirmed. "I told the judge you weren't just Daddy's boss," he said proudly. "I told her you were family." Elena knelt down to his level, no longer caring about her expensive suit or professional image. "You were right," she said, pulling him into a hug that felt like coming home. "We are family." 6 months later, Elena stood in the mansion's kitchen, watching Jace train the third cohort of food entrepreneurs for the Nexus Community Kitchen Initiative. The program had exceeded every projection, supporting 47 small food businesses across Los Angeles and generating enough positive media coverage to attract interest from other cities wanting to replicate their model. But the real success wasn't measured in revenue or press coverage. It was visible in moments like these, when people who'd been struggling alone discovered they were part of a community that believed in their dreams. Mr. Rodriguez was there, no longer the tired man worried about running out of ingredients. His truck, Abuela's Kitchen, had become so popular that he'd hired 2 employees and was considering opening a brick-and-mortar restaurant. He moved through the kitchen with confident ease, sharing advice with newer entrepreneurs about managing supply chains and building customer relationships. "Elena, look what I made." Milo's voice drew her attention to the counter, where he was carefully arranging ingredients for what he called his masterpiece salad, a creation that somehow made sense of the combination of lettuce, cherry tomatoes, croutons, and exactly 3 black olives arranged in a triangle. At 8 years old, Milo had grown into his role as the unofficial program mascot, charming food truck owners and investors alike with his questions about their recipes and his observations about what made people happy. His presence at business meetings had initially seemed unprofessional until Elena realized that his innocent curiosity often revealed insights that adults missed. "That's beautiful, buddy," she said, admiring his careful presentation. "Very sophisticated." Milo beamed at the praise, then grew serious. "Mrs. Kim said she wants to teach me how to make kimchi next week. Is that okay?" "As long as you promise to share it with me," Elena agreed, marveling at how naturally he'd become the bridge between their household and the extended community they'd built. The legal framework that formalized their family had been completed 3 months earlier. Elena had adopted Milo through a process that made their emotional bonds legally permanent. While Jace remained his primary parent, the paperwork was complex, but the result was simple. They were officially what they'd already become in practice, a family that transcended traditional definitions. The board of Nexus had watched Elena's leave of absence stretch into a permanent restructuring of her role. She remained CEO, but with a different focus, less time in boardrooms and more time developing programs that use the company's resources to address real community needs. The stock price had actually risen as investors responded to their authentic social mission, proving that profitable businesses could indeed prioritize purpose alongside profit. "Elena?" Jace appeared beside her with a cup of coffee made exactly the way she'd learned to prefer it, strong but not bitter, with just enough cream to soften the edges. 6 months of living together had created an intimacy of small gestures, daily considerations that spoke of deep affection without requiring grand declarations. "Thank you," she said, accepting the coffee and the brief warmth of his hand brushing hers as he passed it over. Their relationship had evolved slowly, carefully, with the patience of people who understood that the best foundations were built gradually. They were partners in raising Milo, colleagues in running the community program, and increasingly, they were discovering what it meant to be companions who'd chosen each other deliberately rather than falling together by accident. The romantic element was new enough to feel fragile, precious in the way that second chances always are for people who've learned that love isn't guaranteed. They were taking it day by day, meal by meal, conversation by conversation, building something sustainable rather than passionate. "How's the training going?" Elena asked, nodding toward the group of entrepreneurs who were learning about food safety regulations with the focused attention of people who understood that knowledge was the difference between success and failure. "Really well. 3 of them are ready to launch next month, and 2 others are close behind." Jace's pride was evident as he watched his students practice the technical skills that would transform their culinary dreams into viable businesses. Maria would have loved this. Elena had learned that Jace's mentions of his first wife weren't painful for her. They were gifts, acknowledgments that love wasn't a zero-sum game where new relationships required forgetting old ones. Maria's presence in their life had become comfortable, woven into their story rather than competing with it. "She would have been proud of what you've built," Elena agreed. That evening, as they sat in the living room that had once been too formal for everyday use, Elena found herself looking at the latest addition to their game collection. Milo had discovered chess and was determined to master it, though his strategies involved more creativity than traditional rules might suggest. The coffee table showed evidence of their ongoing tournament, a board set up mid-game, with pieces arranged in combinations that reflected Milo's unique approach to warfare. "Your move," Milo announced, settling cross-legged on the floor with the focused intensity he brought to serious competition. Elena studied the board, noting that her king was in check from a knight that definitely hadn't been in that position during their last game. "Did you move pieces while I was getting snacks?" "I repositioned for strategic advantage," Milo said, with the dignity of someone who'd learned new vocabulary and intended to use it. "Mrs. Walsh says lawyers do that all the time." Catherine Walsh had become an unexpected friend during the custody proceedings, and her visits had evolved from professional consultations to social calls that often included chess lessons for Milo. He absorbed her legal terminology with the same enthusiasm he brought to culinary techniques, creating conversations that blended childhood wonder with surprisingly sophisticated concepts. "I see," Elena said solemnly. "In that case, I'll have to respond with a tactical adjustment of my own." She moved her queen to safety, then watched Milo's face light up as he realized she'd simultaneously set up a check of her own. The game had become a metaphor for their entire relationship, playful but serious, unconventional but bound by mutual respect and genuine affection. As she tucked Milo into bed that night, Elena found herself thinking about the crayon drawing that still hung on the refrigerator, his original recipe for happiness that had evolved over the months to include new ingredients and refined techniques. The latest version featured 3 stick figures holding hands under a rainbow, but now there were also food trucks and peacocks, and what appeared to be a building labeled Nexus in careful 8-year-old lettering. "Elena?" Milo's voice was sleepy but thoughtful. "Are you happy?" The question was typical Milo, direct, important, and asked at exactly the moment when the truth felt most accessible. "Yes, sweetheart," she said, smoothing the covers around him. "I'm very happy." "Good, because tomorrow is your birthday, and happy people have better birthdays." Elena had actually forgotten that October 15th had arrived so quickly. Birthdays had become irrelevant during her years of isolation, markers of time passing rather than occasions for celebration. But as she kissed Milo goodnight and turned off his lamp, she realized she was actually looking forward to tomorrow. Downstairs, she found Jace in the kitchen, putting finishing touches on what was obviously a birthday cake, 3 layers of something that smelled like vanilla and cinnamon, decorated with the kind of careful attention he brought to everything he cared about. "Milo told you," she said, leaning against the doorframe to watch him work. 3 months ago," Jace admitted. "He's been planning this for weeks. I hope you like carrot cake." "I love carrot cake," Elena said, though she couldn't remember the last time she'd had any. "Thank you." "Thank you for giving us a reason to celebrate," Jace replied, meeting her eyes with the smile that had become familiar and precious over the months of shared dinners and quiet conversations. As Elena looked around the kitchen that had once been sterile perfection and was now comfortably lived in, she thought about the journey that had brought them all to this moment. A year ago, she'd been successful, but fundamentally alone, measuring her worth in quarterly profits and stock valuations. Now she was surrounded by evidence of a different kind of success school artwork on the refrigerator. Birthday cakes made with love, the comfortable intimacy of people who'd chosen to build a life together. Milo's updated recipe for happiness was more sophisticated than his original version, but the essential ingredients remained the same. People who saw you clearly, work that mattered beyond personal gain, and the courage to choose connection over self-protection. It was a recipe that had transformed not just Elena's life, but everyone who'd become part of their expanding definition of family. The mansion that had once felt like an elegant prison now hummed with the energy of people who belonged together. The food truck program had grown beyond anyone's initial vision, creating ripple effects throughout the community that validated Elena's belief that business success and social impact could reinforce each other rather than compete. But more than any professional achievement, the real transformation was visible in small moments. Milo's confident chatter about his day at school, Jace's easy laughter during their evening conversations, Elena's own reflection in the mirror of someone who looked forward to tomorrow rather than simply enduring today. As she prepared for bed in a house that had become a home, Elena felt the deep satisfaction that came from finally understanding what success actually meant. It wasn't about accumulating wealth or power or recognition from strangers. It was about creating something sustainable and meaningful with people you loved, building a life that honored both your authentic self and your responsibility to others. The last thing she saw before falling asleep was the framed photograph. On her nightstand, not the hidden picture of her first family that had remained locked in her desk drawer for years, but a new picture taken just last week. It showed her Jace and Milo at the farmer's market, all three of them laughing at something Milo had said, caught in a moment of pure, uncomplicated happiness. It was a picture that told the story of a family that had found each other across the spaces between loneliness and hope, creating something beautiful from the willingness to risk caring again. In the soft light of her bedside lamp, their faces glowed with the unmistakable warmth of people who discovered that the best recipe for happiness was surprisingly simple. Take 3 hearts that had known loss, add generous portions of daily kindness, season with laughter and patience, and serve with the understanding that love multiplies rather than divides when shared freely. The recipe, Elena had learned, was perfect exactly as it was.